Have you ever imagined a lone widow defending her homestead against a band of outlaws and turning the tables so completely that they never see it coming? In this riveting tale, Miriam Lockwood stands fast against the infamous Murdoch Gang, a pack of armed men who expect an easy conquest. Little do they know her secluded cabin bristles with hidden defenses, every window doubled as a fortified firing post. Step by step, the gang underestimates her abilities, only to realize far too late the ex-soldier who quietly found peace in the mountains now fights with all the cunning and courage she once wielded in war. Curious how Miriam transformed her rustic dwelling into an unbreakable fortress? Want to learn which final twist forces the outlaws to face consequences far beyond a mere standoff? Stick with us and hear the entire story. You won't believe where it leads. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping frontier adventures just like this one. Your support helps us continue delivering tales of bravery, survival, and justice in the rugged Old West. The mountain breeze whispered through lofty evergreens as 5 armed men crept toward Miriam Lockwood's cabin, hidden deep in the Colorado highlands. Their leader, Calvin Murdoch, eyed the single horse in a small lean-to stable, smirking at the apparent vulnerability of a homesteader's dwelling. Word had drifted through the territory that a widow lived here alone, a supposedly effortless conquest for the Murdoch Gang, known across 2 states for seizing land, gold, and anything else of value. But the men surrounding the rough-hewn structure couldn't fathom the preparations lying behind each window. Before wearing the persona of a quiet homesteader, Miriam Lockwood had served as Lockwood the Lark, the most feared sharpshooter in a clandestine Union squad called the Eagle Company during the Civil War. The Murdoch Gang was about to learn that in the hardest way. The morning sun slanted through the high pines, illuminating the porch where Miriam sat, lovingly oiling the parts of her Winchester rifle. Now in her late 40s, her steady hands and keen eyes testified to decades of discipline. She'd built a secluded life here over 3 years, ever since burying her husband, Ethan Lockwood, and abandoning the identity that had once made her a legend in the war. In her new role, she passed as a contemplative widow with only a modest cabin and a stable for her horse. Of course, on the surface, her home appeared unremarkable. 2 simple rooms, a stone chimney, and a front porch that looked ready for a rocking chair. Yet careful eyes, if there were any so keen, might notice subtle modifications. Each window had been altered to include a hidden metal reinforcement. Wooden shutters displayed decorative carvings, but could quickly become ballistic shields. Wooden racks inside the cabin positioned rifles at precise angles. Miriam Lockwood never said so publicly, but she had taken her cabin building far beyond the typical frontier approach. She wanted more than an abode for simple living. She had constructed a small fortress, though you'd never know it unless you attacked. Finishing with the rifle, Miriam set it by the door and began tidying up the single interior living space. Barely more than a kitchen area and a bedroom, the cabin also stored locked boxes beneath the bed, relics of her past as Lockwood the Lark. A half-dozen extra firearms, each meticulously maintained, lay encased in custom padding. She kept them hidden under floorboards in a false storage chest. Years had passed since she'd needed any of them. The weekly journey into Pine Hollow for dry goods and basic necessities rarely suggested danger. Locals saw her as an introverted widow who preferred quiet to the gossip in town. In truth, she was no longer certain whether that reclusive persona was entirely an act. Since the war and Ethan's death, solitude felt more honest than social pleasantries. But she couldn't pretend all threats had vanished. Letters from an old contact, Marshal Boyd Sullivan, had warned about outlaws scouring the region. The Murdoch Gang, infamous for preying on isolated ranches and small farms. They robbed stagecoaches, forced widows off their land, and torched homes behind them. Saddling her Palomino mare, Cora, Miriam considered those warnings. If the Murdoch Gang operated locally, she might become their next target. Sure enough, from the vantage of her trail, she spotted hoofprints deeper in the woods, impressions suggesting watchers around her property. The sign was subtle, a trampled shrub too recently crushed to be from a mere passing traveler. That sign of intrusion made her heart stiffen. Over the years, she'd honed her cabin's defenses for exactly such a showdown. While she certainly had no desire to kill anyone, she would not yield to a band of marauders. If the Murdoch Gang wanted a fight, she would bring to bear every technique she had once employed behind enemy lines. Miriam's ride into Pine Hollow took over an hour. the narrow path carved through tall pines and rocky outcrops. The smell of pine needles mingled with the cooler hint of an approaching autumn. She arrived at Humphrey's General Store, tying Cora at the hitching post out front. The store was the main hub for supplies and gossip in the modest settlement. A gray-bearded proprietor, Humphrey Brent, welcomed Miriam with a polite nod and the usual comment about the weather. Inside the store, a scattering of locals browsed shelves of canned goods, tools, and bolts of cloth. Miriam kept her interactions measured, speaking softly and avoiding the friendlier chatter of folks who would love to learn more about her. On her short list this week were extra lamp oil, flour, salt, coffee, and a small spool of wire. She made sure to add nails and hinges. While these items could be deemed normal for a homestead's upkeep, in her hands they served additional covert purposes, reinforcing shutters, improving trap triggers, or adjusting vantage points around the cabin. She overheard Sam Alder, a rancher from the next valley, discuss with May Pierce about troubles in the region. Bandits, or so they say, picking off a claim out near Two Rivers Creek. Heard the occupant was left battered, forced to sign over the property on the spot. May, stirring a cup of ground coffee in her hands, shrugged with worry. Sheriff Billings is doing what he can, but these outlaws vanish into the mountains soon as they strike. The words mirrored the concerns that had been echoing in letters from Marshal Sullivan, a cunning group that targeted the vulnerable, leaving no official trace. Miriam also caught snippets of conversation from a pair of rough-looking trail hands who discussed Old Man Garber's ranch, a recent scene of violence. One had lowered his voice, but she could still make out. Murdoch and his men are unstoppable. Took everything, left Garber near dead. She filed the information away, concluding the Murdoch gang was expanding their range of terror. As Miriam paid for her goods, Humphrey Brent gave her a worried look. "Ma'am, you've heard the talk. Might be safer to stay in town a while. Rent a room at Miss Dahl's boarding house. No sense facing that risk by yourself." Miriam responded with a practiced half-smile. "I'll keep it in mind, Mr. Brent, but I love my place up in the hills." She lifted her supplies into Cora's saddlebags, feeling him watch her with pity. Everyone in Pine Hollow believed she was a harmless widow who had relocated west to rebuild her life. Not even Humphrey, with all his storehouse of gossip, fathomed her lethal background. Riding home, Miriam stayed especially alert. Any watchers that had scouted her land might also check the main trail used by homesteaders, hoping to confirm she truly lived alone. She saw nothing overt, yet the forest's hush felt weighted, as though eyes watched her from shadows. She dismounted at a creek crossing, crouching to examine faint footprints. Slim impressions, perhaps a man in boots, had passed there not long ago. The track confirmed her suspicion that the Murdoch gang had begun to close in. Reaching her cabin by mid-afternoon, Miriam delivered supplies inside and methodically double-checked each exit and window. Setting aside the groceries, she focused on securing vantage points, adjusting certain hidden shutters so they offered the best angle. Next, she tested her special trap triggers along the kitchen windowsill, a fake floorboard that would collapse under an intruder's weight, dropping them into a shallow pit. She had installed it months ago but never needed to see it in action. When dusk arrived, Miriam lit only 2 lamps, ensuring the interior lighting was minimal, enough to appear normal while not giving away her movements. She posted herself by a side window, observing the tree line as the final rays vanished. The slight snapping of a twig in the distance confirmed watchers again, maybe just 1 or 2 men verifying her nightly routine. She allowed them to see the silhouette of a lonely widow completing chores, locking the stable, and retiring to her front room. In truth, she wouldn't sleep. Each breath she took was measured, each muscle ready. If they intended to strike at dawn, that would match the pattern gleaned from rumors, and she intended to be wide awake, prepared to greet them. 3 nights passed quietly, enough to make a casual observer suspect the bandits had chosen different prey. But Miriam knew better. The Murdoch gang weren't amateurs. They would want to map her routines, identify whether neighbors visited, and check if she carried hidden wealth or kept a ranch hand nearby. Each day she simulated her usual schedule, a morning walk around the property, midday wood chopping in view of any hidden watchers, and an afternoon spent weeding the small garden patch behind the cabin. But behind this normalcy lay a network of cunning precautions. She had installed hidden tripwires in a few strategic places, concealed by leaves or pine needles. She also rigged a pair of alarms near the creek approach. By the fourth morning, sign of infiltration finally surfaced. While collecting water at sunrise, Miriam spotted distinct footprints near the stable. Fresh, no more than hours old. The prints looped from a stand of pines to the side of the stable and then retreated into the woods. Whoever made them had believed the soft ground wouldn't reveal much, but Miriam could read impressions the way some read books. She guessed at least two men, each checking for a second horse or any evidence of other occupants. While typically calm and methodical, she now felt a subtle tension, a readiness humming in her blood. Another day or two, and they would come in force, likely at dawn, using the half-light for advantage. A standard tactic: circle the cabin, demand her surrender with threats, potentially light the place on fire if she resisted. She knew their playbook all too well. The men behind it had served in cavalry regiments that employed similar siege methods back in the war. Their leader, Calvin Murdoch, had a reputation for giving targets a single opportunity to relinquish their land, then bringing swift violence if they refused. Late that evening, Miriam completed final checks. Taking a small wooden box from beneath her bed, she lifted out a disassembled metal tube, a telescopic sight that she had acquired during the war from a foreign gunsmith who specialized in advanced optics. She attached it to her favorite rifle, calibrating it for mid-range distances of 200 to 400 yards, precisely the distance she guessed the gang might keep while they positioned watchers or attempted a stealth approach. For extra insurance, she double-checked the illusions and traps near potential entry points. One false window was rigged with a floorboard trap, another with a hidden shotgun contraption triggered by an inside lever if intruders forced their way in. She reflected with some regret that she'd hoped never to need these. But Ethan's death and her war experiences had taught her that evil men often sense no shame in attacking a seemingly vulnerable soul. Just after midnight, she glimpsed something in her small side mirror near the parlor window, a shadow moving among the trees. She froze, controlling her breath. Through that angled view, she detected a young scout, maybe no older than 20, creeping carefully, scanning the cabin. Miriam studied his posture, noting quiet steps that suggested limited military training. He carried a rifle, muzzle pointed low. She let him continue. He found no sign of watchers beyond the single light in her window. The youth crept away, disappearing into deeper forest. If he was checking the property at midnight, a group assault would likely follow near dawn. Miriam carefully banked her small fire, letting the cabin's interior grow dim. She ate a bit of dried venison, swallowing sips of water to stay hydrated. Then she donned her older cavalry gloves with the fingertips removed, the same pair she had worn on behind-the-lines scouting missions for the Eagle Company. She set a pair of tinted lens goggles on the side table, ready in case the morning glare proved an issue. Propping her rifle on a hidden rest, she settled onto a cushion near the parlor window, aiming for a vantage that let her scan the west and north corners of the property. Through her subtle arrangement of mirrors and angled glass, she would see them long before they saw her. The entire cabin radiated the hush of an ambush site, ready to unleash precise fury on intruders. Around 3 in the morning, she heard the distinct nicker of a horse, too far to be Cora. The soft crunch of twigs under boots followed. They were positioning men around her property. She exhaled once, slow and calm, letting the old soldier's instincts guide her. The Murdoch gang believed they had cornered a solitary widow, but it was they who were cornered in her carefully prepared domain. The first blush of dawn tinted the eastern sky a faint gray as Calvin Murdoch's voice shattered the stillness. "Mrs. Lockwood," he called from somewhere near the front porch, his tone artificially courteous. "We need a moment of your time." Through a narrow gap in the parlor window, Miriam spotted 4 shadowy figures, 2 on either side of her door, another pair hugging the stable wall. She couldn't see Murdoch himself yet, but she recognized the crisp efficiency of the team's layout. They had done their homework. Pressing her lips together, Miriam gripped her Winchester in silence, mentally mapping every approach. She knew their objective: intimidate her into opening the door, glean the number of occupants, then storm inside if she refused. She glimpsed a flicker of movement near the stable's rear, a faint shifting in the shadows. Possibly a 5th man? Meanwhile, the men by her cabin door tested the latch. One knocked politely, an unsettling formality. "Mrs. Lockwood, it's a cold morning. We'd appreciate a bit of hospitality. When no answer came, they exchanged glances, rechecking their firearms. Finally, Murdoch's tone hardened. I'm told you're alone, ma'am. This doesn't need to get ugly. We've come to discuss your land. There's money on the table if you cooperate. Miriam suppressed a grim smile. If they believed that angle would soften her, they were mistaken. She carefully adjusted her vantage, ensuring she had the silhouette of both men near her door. If either tried kicking it in, she would respond swiftly. From her vantage point at a false mirror angle, she saw Murdoch step into a patch of pale dawn light. He was tall, with the posture of an ex-officer, wearing a battered Confederate cavalry coat that signaled a certain pride in his old war identity. Miriam's old unit had heard rumors of men like him after the war, fallen officers who turned their leadership skills to crime. Mrs. Lockwood, Murdoch tried once more. No sense in staying quiet. We can do this the friendly way. An expectant hush followed. Miriam chose to break her silence. Your friendly talk doesn't align with the firearms you're pointing at my home, Mr. Murdoch. The men paused at the unexpected certainty of her voice. One of the outlaws, a bearded man near the porch steps, barked a low laugh. Our firearms keep things safe, ma'am. We wouldn't want you making any rash decisions. The threat was plain as day. Miriam remained composed. Rash decisions like defending my property from trespassers? The standoff thickened. Through a small side mirror, she identified another figure creeping along the cabin's eastern wall, checking the windows. We've heard you're an unmarried woman, Miss Lockwood, and that the territory's surveyors have interest in your land, Murdoch continued. We represent certain investors. They want a swift purchase without fuss. A standard approach. Leverage fear and isolation, promise easy compensation, and then escalate violence if refused. Miriam responded in her composed, measured tone. My land's not for sale, Mr. Murdoch, nor do I host uninvited visitors. You can leave now. Outside, she saw the men exchange glances. They hadn't expected outright defiance. One attempted the door latch again. If you keep silent, we'll open this door ourselves. Murdoch's clipped voice revealed a war-honed decisiveness. All right, men, surround the place. She might bluff, but we'll see if she fires a shot. The outlaws moved into a formation reminiscent of a cavalry pincer, each man picking a line of approach. Their discipline, ironically, mirrored that of Miriam's old Eagle Company. Yet she had outmaneuvered well-organized Confederates many times. She readied herself at a vantage that gave coverage of the door's immediate approach. Suddenly, a boot slammed against the door. The latch rattled, but Miriam's heavy iron bar held. The repeated impact tested her cabin's integrity. She inhaled calmly, remembering the crossbeams she'd reinforced. A final, heavier kick came. When the door still didn't yield, the men paused. Hinges are reinforced, one cursed. We'll need to blow it or come through a window. Murdoch's voice intervened before they escalated. Don't ruin the building if we can avoid it. It reminded Miriam of a commanding officer instructing subordinates not to damage a valuable supply depot. The analogy only hardened her resolve. In the hush that followed, she heard them shift to the windows, less guarded in their opinion. Little did they know, each window was a carefully engineered vantage. She inhaled, steadied her rifle, and whispered to the memory of Ethan. They want to fight? Let them see who they're dealing with. When the first outlaw thrust his rifle through the slightly ajar back window, Miriam reacted swiftly. She pulled a hidden lever, releasing a cleverly rigged floor section. The unsuspecting intruder toppled with a startled yelp into a 3-foot drop, flailing as he hit the slope boards that funneled him into a walled pit beneath her kitchen. She heard the thud and a muffled oath. Meanwhile, at the front door, another heavy-booted kick announced the men's impatience. Mrs. Lockwood, barked a voice from outside. We have your man. If you want him safe, open up. Miriam nearly laughed at the irony. The man they claimed to hold hostage was actually stuck in her trap. She recognized the ploy as a standard intimidation tactic. Let them think they had leverage. I have no man in that sense, she called calmly, and I suspect your friend has come to realize who's truly captive. At that, she fired her first shot of the standoff, a warning round that ricocheted off the ground just short of the door. The outlaws outside scrambled for cover, 2 diving behind wood piles and 1 rolling behind a water trough. Silence solidified for a moment, but Miriam watched them through her angled mirrors. A man with a distinctive limp and Confederate-issue boots conferred with Murdoch. They seemed tense. She recognized that limping figure's posture, as though he had once carried a side saddlebag for cavalry, possibly a fellow war veteran. She took note of how he moved, scanning the perimeter with the discipline of training. Murdoch tried a different tack. "You're resourceful, Mrs. Lockwood, I'll grant that. But we're 8. We can wait you out. You can't hold off forever." She answered by shifting positions quietly. With the floors built for sound minimization, she made no more noise than a cat. Using a specialized rifle rest built into her bedroom window frame, she took aim at the stable area. Another outlaw was creeping that direction, likely to see if there were other horses or if someone might escape from there. She squeezed the trigger with the discipline of countless war operations. The bullet parted the dirt inches from the intruder's boots, forcing him to yelp and dart for cover. She could have shot him if she'd intended lethal force, but in her heart, she wanted to give them every chance to walk away. In the hidden pit, the hapless outlaw discovered the small wooden shaft leading nowhere but up, with smooth sides preventing escape. His curses echoed faintly through the boards. Miriam kept an ear to his frantic rummaging, though she doubted he would find any advantage. The war had taught her to imprison rather than kill whenever possible, especially if it might glean intelligence or discourage the rest from continuing. Murdoch's voice rose once more. "We're no common hoodlums. We represent bigger interests, people who can make your life hell if you don't cooperate. Don't be a fool." Miriam steadied her breathing. She'd heard the same rhetoric from profiteers on both sides of the war. "I've known bigger interests than you, Mr. Murdoch," she called back. "They've come and gone. My life's quite at peace when left alone." At that retort, Murdoch signaled a volley of gunfire. Shots pummeled the exterior logs, some splintering a portion of the front window's wooden panel. Miriam flinched at the sudden hail of bullets, but her cabin's reinforcements held. Snipers from her old Eagle Company had taught her how to layer wood with concealed metal sheets to create strong ballistic protection. The barrage continued for half a minute, the outlaws reloading while shouting instructions. She gleaned from their calls that they planned a multi-pronged breach attempt. Pressing a second hidden lever, Miriam readied the cabin's next defensive measure, a set of pivoting boards overhead that would drop if a ceiling hatch were forced. Her entire dwelling was rigged like a fortress for exactly this scenario. As the men tried reloading and organizing themselves again, she swiftly changed vantage to a side window, searching for movement in the tree line. Sure enough, a slender man with sharp reflexes was skirting the perimeter, probably hoping to flank her from behind the stable. "You do like to be methodical," she muttered, admiring his discipline. But methodical was her domain. The tension mounted as Miriam observed the men regroup. They realized all too well now that the cabin was heavily fortified. She heard them exchange frustrated curses, seeing how every approach was pinned by a hidden vantage point. Suddenly, Calvin Murdoch called out, "Mrs. Lockwood, you have an impressive fortress here. But do you really want this to end in blood? Let's talk terms." His voice lowered in pitch, adopting an air of old-fashioned gallantry. "Step out, and we'll treat you kindly." Miriam glimpsed Murdoch's stance through a side mirror. He stood partially behind a thick tree trunk, angled so if she fired, he might manage to dodge. The older, limping man was at his flank, scanning the windows, apparently nervous. "I see your mouth, Mr. Murdoch, but I trust nothing that comes from it," she replied. "Your men already fired enough bullets to fill a war zone. I doubt you intend courtesy." "I gave the order to subdue you, not murder you," he answered curtly. "No sense in damaging property if it can be avoided." His admission confirmed to Miriam that they wanted her alive only until she signed away her claim or revealed hidden valuables. Once her cooperation wasn't necessary, the outcome would be lethal. She'd witnessed that pattern across half a dozen frontier settlements. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a flicker near the stable. One of the outlaws pressed forward, probably thinking to toss a lit torch or spark the roof. She had coated her roof with a fire-retardant mixture, but the man didn't know that. Taking careful aim from her vantage slot, she squeezed off a shot that clipped the torch from his grip, extinguishing it in the snow. The man recoiled, wide-eyed, another chance for them to realize she wasn't missing out of ineptitude but mercy. That triggered a fresh volley of disorganized gunfire from the outlaws, but each shot simply spanged against Miriam's reinforced walls or whizzed harmlessly off shutters. The attacker's frustration grew palpable. Inside, a plaintive voice rose from the pit. I, I'm done. Let me out. I swear I'll leave. Miriam recognized the scout's youthful tone. She'd trapped him before the main hostilities. Let him go, Tully, one of the outlaws yelled from outside, a note of worry creeping in. They realized now that the young man was in more danger from them continuing this fight than from her. Miriam hovered near the hidden kitchen trapdoor, listening to his plaintive pleas. She was torn. Letting him out risked him rejoining the fight, but he seemed sincerely afraid. She turned back to the front parlor in time to catch a snippet of Murdoch's subdued exchange with the limping man. She picked up words like railroad and land speculator, confirming her suspicion that bigger money was bankrolling them. The men paused as though debating their next move. I'm giving you one final chance, Murdoch announced loudly, as if mustering the dignity of an officer. Come out, surrender your property, and we'll let you ride away with a measure of gold. We have no interest in your life if you cooperate. Miriam withheld an immediate retort. She needed them to talk more, to reveal names or further details. She adjusted her vantage, pressing an ear to the floor near the wall, eavesdropping on what the others told each other. She discerned references to a man named Victor Delacroix, apparently the investor behind these acquisitions. Delacroix demanded no witnesses left behind, or so said one scruffy-voiced outlaw. That sealed it for her. No matter what Murdoch said, his orders were to eliminate her after she surrendered the deed. Rising to her full height behind the door, Miriam spoke in a level tone. There's nothing I want from your gold, Mr. Murdoch, and I've already arranged that if I die, all evidence of your boss's scheme goes to a federal marshal. Think about that. A heavy silence pressed in from outside. Murdoch cursed under his breath. He recognized the strategic disadvantage. Even if they killed her, the evidence would implicate them and Delacroix. But forced to press forward, he signaled a final push. Fellows, we do it the hard way, he snarled. Take her by storm before high noon. In the pit, the boyish scout sobbed, clearly wanting no part in a suicidal charge. Miriam exhaled. The storm was about to break. She reacquired her vantage rifle, checking the breach. The final act would come swiftly. She murmured her old Eagle Company motto in a whisper, words she rarely uttered since the war. We stand fast in truth. A hush blanketed the pine forest as the sun rose higher. Through her arrangement of mirrored angles, Miriam counted 6 men still active outside, each scattered around a radius of roughly 50 yards. Their formation was advanced enough to avoid bunching up, reducing the risk that she could pick them all off in a cluster. But she recognized they were steeling themselves for an all-in rush. Meanwhile, Murdoch had singled out one man, tall, wiry, with a bandolier of shotgun shells draped across his chest, to maneuver around the cabin's west side. Another pair angled in from the east, behind a stand of fir trees. Each step was careful as they tried to keep the building in their line of sight but stay out of hers. Yet they had no clue just how many vantage points she possessed inside. In a carefully choreographed move, Murdoch shouted, "Now!" The men near the porch broke into a sprint, while the two from the east fired shots to pin Miriam down. The lone gunman at the west corner hustled low, anticipating a blind spot in the cabin's design. But Miriam was 2 steps ahead. She pivoted swiftly to the west window, spotting the wiry man creeping in a crouch. With calm composure, she fired. The bullet kicked dirt at his feet, nearly toppling him in surprise. A split-second shift of aim, a second shot. It grazed his forearm, forcing him to cry out and dive behind a tree. Non-lethal, but enough to neutralize his approach. Even as he tried to hide, she relocated, sliding across the cabin's interior to a vantage toward the front porch. 2 men were charging that porch. She glimpsed them between shutters. One carried an improvised battering ram, likely a log section. She waited for them to commit. They dashed across open ground. With a skillful squeeze of the trigger, she sent a bullet snapping through the ram, fracturing it. The man carrying it stumbled, dropping the log. The second man tried to drag him forward, but realized they were fully exposed. Both lurched away, seeking cover behind the water trough, cursing in frustration. Murdoch, from behind a fallen log, fired repeatedly toward the windows, trying to cover the fiasco of his men's failed assault. Gunshots rattled the porch steps. Splinters flew from the door's frame. But Miriam had left that vantage seconds earlier, re-emerging now by a side window to target the stable area. Their discipline started eroding under stress. She recognized the signs, shouting disorganized commands, men scattering unpredictably. Suddenly, the voice of the young scout from the trap pit rang out again. "Mum, Mr. Murdoch, don't leave me in here." He yelled in near panic, pounding on the undersides of the floor. The commotion only added confusion. Murdoch hollered back, "Hang on, kid. We'll get you out once we secure the building." But from Miriam's vantage, it was clear that the kid had no illusions about rescue. The tension soared, her fortress still intact, the outlaws battered and pinned. Across the yard, one of Murdoch's men, apparently shaken by the fiasco, mounted a horse and fled, ignoring Murdoch's bellowed commands to come back. That defection removed a chunk of their manpower. The homestead assault had turned into an unraveling fiasco for the gang. In war, Miriam had seen this scenario countless times. A frontal assault stymied by superior defensive strategy, leading to panic or desertion among the attackers. She calmly took advantage. Glancing at her meticulously placed series of small mirrors, she confirmed another intruder creeping near the southeast corner. She swiveled to that position, fired a shot that clipped the corner of the cabin, but served to spook the attacker enough to freeze him in place. A hush fell as the men regrouped again behind scattered cover. Murdoch's anger boiled audibly. "We can still take her if we coordinate," he snarled, though his voice lacked the earlier confidence. He likely recognized that if they lingered, they risked serious injury or Marshal Sullivan's arrival. But Murdoch and at least 2 loyal men clung to the plan, refusing to concede. Miriam's heartbeat thumped steadily. She inhaled a slow breath, exhaled softly. Time to end this standoff. Miriam recognized that letting the standoff drag on only increased risks. Her supplies might last, but random chance could shift in the outlaws' favor. She needed a decisive maneuver to force them to withdraw. That meant stepping outside her purely defensive posture. The next lull in gunfire was her opportunity. Rechecking the loaded chamber of her rifle, she crept to a narrow interior ladder that led to a small attic loft. She'd converted that loft into a vantage point that gave a partial overhead view around the cabin's perimeter. Slipping up the ladder quietly, she accessed a short horizontal shooting corridor built under the roof. Through this corridor, she could see down onto Murdoch's approximate location at the fallen log. Another angled mirror let her keep track of men near the porch. Sure enough, Murdoch was there, conferring with the limping man, presumably hashing some final push. The battered log ram lay discarded near them. She suspected they might attempt a quick second try. She lined up the shot carefully. She didn't aim for lethal effect. She hoped they would see sense and retreat. Her bullet landed near Murdoch's feet, flicking splinters of bark from the log. That startled him, forcing him to roll behind a stump. "Enough," she called out, her voice echoing from the loft, making it sound overhead. "This ends now. Either leave or face the consequences." Through her vantage, she saw Murdoch's expression contort in frustration. The limping man pleaded with him in a subdued tone. She couldn't hear every word, but the posture suggested he wanted out. Another man emerged from behind a trough, brandishing a pistol, looking spooked and furious. Suddenly, the squeal of hinges cut across the tension. The back of the cabin had a small side door, which Miriam normally kept barred, but now it was opening. For a frozen second, she feared an intruder had found a trick. Then, stepping into the early morning light, came a figure in a dusty duster and a battered Union Army hat, Sheriff Billings. Behind him advanced 2 more men with rifles raised, local deputies she recognized from Pine Hollow. They had discovered the approach while the outlaws were distracted. Caught by surprise, Murdoch's men whirled at the new arrival. The sheriff barked, "Drop your weapons or we'll open fire." One outrider near the stable tried to draw on Billings, but a deputy shot the gun from his hand, sending him scurrying for cover. The chaos soared anew, but this time, with the sheriff's men pincering from behind and Miriam controlling the vantage from above, the outlaws' position crumbled. Murdoch and his limping confidant managed to hurl themselves behind the same log for minimal cover, while a second wave of gunfire broke out between the deputies and a pair of outlaws who stubbornly refused to surrender. Miriam recognized her advantage. With the outlaws divided, she fired a warning shot near one who was reloading near a pile of brush. He froze, seeing the futility. Another deputy took position behind a tree, shouting at the men to drop arms. Amid the confusion, the young scout in the pit hammered on the trap floor, yelling, "Sheriff, I'm stuck down here." Billings recognized the voice. "Henry? That you?" Henry, she finally had the boy's name. Billings moved swiftly to the cabin's interior to assess the unusual pit arrangement. Meanwhile, the standoff outside reached a climax. Two outlaws surrendered outright, dropping rifles and raising hands. One more was pinned behind a trough, pinned by Billings' men. Realizing there was no escape, he flung his weapon out, shouting for mercy. Murdoch alone, along with the limping man, tried to keep composure. But the facts were clear. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught between Miriam's vantage and the sheriff's approach. Glancing around, Murdoch exhaled hard, then let his pistol clatter to the ground. "We stand down," he announced with forced calm, "but I expect fair treatment under the law." The limping man followed suit, dropping his rifle. From her loft-corrugated door, Miriam let out a breath of relief as she watched them comply. Only her war-honed discipline had kept the confrontation from exploding into carnage. Descending the ladder quietly, she rechecked each window, ensuring no last-minute betrayal. Outside, Billings' men were disarming the outlaws thoroughly, placing them in irons. Indeed, it was over, or so it seemed. She'd need to confirm that behind the logs lay no new threat. But the exhausted posture of these criminals said it all. They had no fight left. Half an hour later, the Murdoch gang, at least those not fleeing, were lined up beside the stable, wrists bound. The boy Henry, bruised and dirty from the pit, stared at the ground, chastened and silent. Sheriff Billings, taking stock of the aftermath, approached Miriam near the cabin porch. "Miss Lockwood," he said in a measured tone, "I suspected you were no ordinary homesteader, but this is a fortress." Miriam offered a calm nod, holding her Winchester at a relaxed angle. "I prefer to call it a well-prepared dwelling, Sheriff." She saw Billings' gaze wander over the reinforced shutters, the subtle vantage ports, the cunning layout. He clearly understood it was more than simple homestead precaution. "Thanks for arriving when you did," she added. "Though I had matters in hand, it saved needless bloodshed." Billings cleared his throat. "We hurried once we heard from a traveler, said he suspected trouble was brewing up here. Thank goodness we made it. These men are wanted across multiple counties. Murdoch's especially dangerous." He glanced back at the outriders, now forced to kneel, while the deputies checked their identification. "I recognize some from wanted posters. They'll face plenty of charges, including attempted murder and banditry." From within the line of captives, Murdoch gave Miriam a grudging nod of acknowledgement. "You were formidable, Ms. Lockwood. I've seen whole platoons crumble against lesser defenses. If we'd known you were someone of your skill, we'd never have tried this." His tone was neither apology nor pure rancor, more an admission of respect for a peer in warfare. One deputy stepped closer to the sheriff, speaking in a hush. "They keep mentioning a major investor, name of Delacroix. Might be the same man behind land thefts in the region." Billings' eyes flicked to Miriam, who returned his gaze calmly. She had gleaned that name already, but the deputy's mention confirmed it. "We'll question them properly," Billings assured her. "If Delacroix is orchestrating these property seizures, we'll gather evidence." Miriam exhaled. "You'll find plenty inside. My husband Ethan collected numerous documents tying certain shady expansions to Delacroix's group. That's part of why they came after me, I suspect." She locked eyes with Murdoch. "He told you to remove me by force, correct?" Murdoch's jaw tightened. A fleeting look crossed his face. Then he nodded slightly. "Yes. He wanted you off this land, dead or running. Thought it'd be a quick job. We never expected you to be a war-seasoned sharpshooter." "I can personally testify," Miriam noted, turning to the sheriff, "that their instructions included no survivors if I refused to sign over the deed. I hope that clarifies the charge." Billings gave her a grim but understanding nod. "It does. We'll get confessions to back it up. That boy, Henry, might talk about the details. The others might too if they think it'll spare them the noose." A wave of tiredness swept Miriam. She'd been on alert since the small hours, her body fueled by adrenaline and war-forged instincts. Now that the confrontation was done, she felt each muscle ache. She hoisted her rifle again, sliding it into place by the cabin door. "Sheriff, these men are your responsibility now. I'll be lodging a statement with the territorial marshal as well. Delacroix's crimes run deeper than a single raid." Billings tapped his hat politely. We'll handle it. I plan to ride them back to Pine Hollow's jail, then telegraph the marshal for a transfer. Some might try to name Delacroix in exchange for leniency. If we piece it all together, we could bring him down for good. He paused, studying Miriam. I'm grateful you held them here instead of letting them roam free. But part of me wonders, are you sure you're not also a marshal in disguise? A quiet smile touched her lips. I'm just a widow, Sheriff, she said softly. A woman who's known enough war to realize there's no shame in defending what's rightfully hers. In that moment, Billings recognized that the label of widow was only a fraction of her identity. He glimpsed in her something fierce, formed by the crucible of conflict, tempered by personal loss. He suspected the territory owed her more than a simple handshake of thanks. As the deputy secured the men for transport, Miriam stepped back inside the cabin. The tension drained from her limbs as she sank into a wooden chair, reflecting on how swiftly life at a remote homestead could erupt into battle. She'd come to these mountains seeking a tranquil existence, but the ghosts of war had trailed her, culminating in another confrontation. Yet, as her gaze flicked across the carefully concealed vantage ports and the battered furniture that withstood gunfire, she felt a cautious sense of relief that her measures had prevented outright slaughter. In the days following the raid, quiet settled back over Miriam Lockwood's land. The noise of gunfire, curses, and threats had given way to the usual sounds of wind among the pines, accompanied by the occasional hawk's cry high above. She patched bullet gouges in the shutters and walls, verifying that the structural reinforcements remained intact. In Pine Hollow, Sheriff Billings had conveyed that the Murdoch gang was behind bars awaiting a formal territorial marshal to pick them up. Murdoch himself faced charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and more. The battered property deed had never left Miriam's possession. On one crisp morning, a deputy named Kyle Roberts rode up with news. Sheriff Billings says Murdoch's men have admitted to working for Victor Delacroix. Seems they fear him more than the noose, but they talked anyway. Miriam paused in her chores. Delacroix's name has surfaced a lot lately. The sheriff's building a case against him, I hear. Roberts nodded. It'll take time and more evidence. But your husband's documents, plus confessions from Murdoch's crew, could be enough to bring Delacroix to trial. Miriam handed the deputy a sealed pouch containing copies of Ethan's key documents. Make sure Billings gets these. Some letters in there also tie Delacroix to forgeries and intimidation across half the county. If you need more detail, I have additional ledgers hidden. Roberts gave her a respectful tip of his hat. We'll lock them up safe. The territory needs a clean sweep of these rackets if we want honest settlement. After the deputy left, Miriam spent a few hours breaking down the more lethal traps around her cabin. She had no wish for accidents to befall a curious traveler or wild animal. The pit under the kitchen floor remained in place, but she removed some of its cruder rigging. She reasoned that an elaborate fortress might become a liability if she ever decided to sell or pass on the property. She still planned to keep enough defenses intact to deter the rare bandits, but not maintain a war-level stronghold. Occasionally, while taking a seat on the porch in the late afternoon, she ran her fingers over a tarnished medallion that she'd hidden away since the Civil War. Lockwood the Lark, it read on the back. Just as her father had predicted, the war left deep scars, yet also taught her resourcefulness. She recalled her time behind Confederate lines, forging alliances with local sympathizers, orchestrating nighttime infiltrations. That world felt so distant now, yet remnants had shaped her into who she was. This day proved those skills still thrived within her. On a mild day a week later, Marshal Boyd Sullivan, her old acquaintance who had first warned her about the Murdoch gang, arrived. He greeted her on the porch, shaking his head at the repaired bullet holes. Heard about your standoff from Sheriff Billings. I'd almost pay to see Murdoch's face when he realized he'd cornered a war scout instead of a simple homesteader. Miriam smiled faintly. It wasn't a show worth repeating, but hopefully it puts fear in the hearts of other predators. Sullivan described how Delacroix was attempting to bribe officials to bury the investigation. But with Murdoch's men flipping, the territorial judge had enough cause to subpoena Delacroix. They want you to testify, Miriam, Sullivan said gently. I know you hate public scenes, but your testimony could nail him. For a moment, she stared at the horizon, the golden sun setting behind the towering pines. Then I'll do it. If my words can stop more families from losing their land, I owe them that. She sighed. The path to living quietly under the pines might still continue, but not without fulfilling this duty first. When Sullivan departed, Miriam returned inside. The cabin felt warmer, calmer now. She reflected on how Ethan's mission to expose land swindlers had become hers. She had proven that even a lone widow with the right preparations can hold her ground against outlaws. Laying her rifle aside, she picked up a half-finished knitting project, something never even touched since the war. Life, she mused, was about balance, knowing when to sharpen bullets and when to knit. One chapter of conflict had closed, but she would remain vigilant. Her gloved hands could still cradle a rifle if the future demanded it. For now, though, she savored a moment of peace in the knowledge that justice had, at least in part, been served. Reflecting on Miriam Lockwood's ultimate victory, it's clear that resourcefulness, steady resolve, and a dose of mercy can triumph against overwhelming odds. By mastering her environment and refusing to be victimized, she kept the Murdoch gang at bay until help arrived. With both law on her side and her homestead fortified by love and memories, she not only secured justice for herself but also inspired a deeper respect among the townspeople and the lawmen who witnessed her stand. Far from leaving a trail of devastation, she captured criminals, protected her property, and sparked a broader investigation into wrongdoing across the territory. How did Miriam's cool composure under fire speak to you? Which of her tactics surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep this conversation going. By sharing your perspective, you help shape the future stories we bring you. Together, let's celebrate the unbreakable spirit of those who dare to defend what's rightfully theirs in the great Western frontier.